Sean Phillips loves backgrounds, or at least that's the impression you get reading much of his work. And I'm going to look at especially the fade out with Ed Brubaker and Elizabeth Breitweiser, because the backgrounds are used so much to establish location and place, but also Phillips knows when and how much to give you for the right moment, and I think that's really, really interesting. So we're going to take a dive into some of these examples. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So we're going to look at the final issue of the Fade Out, and it's worth saying, I suppose, that there may be spoilers contained within the pages of this since it's the last issue, but I'm not really going to be discussing anything too spoilery, but it's just something to bear in mind. So this page, which is actually just the second page into the issue, and it's the first time we see this character, who's our lead character, Charlie, head outside. And really this page is just all background, and I think that's intentional. The opening panel is of Chavez Ravine, and it strives for place and reality, which is really useful for the panel anyway because it's giving us a location. But what it does is try to tell you about the average income of the area. It sort of tries to tell you about it being a bit run down, there's a place where a whorehouse is, so it makes sense. But what Phillips does is he really renders it, and with Breitweiser's colours it gives the sense of almost like a photograph. It looks like a real place. And I mean that in the level of detail, not specifically in the terms of rendering it realistically, although they do that, but just the amount of information. The street extends, the broken fence on the right side, the way it stacks and builds, even the vague sense of location in the further background. It feels like a real place. It has authenticity. And I don't want to say that that is because of the rendering style itself so much as it is about the amount of detail and touches that they put into the image. I think if you did this in a more traditionally cartoony way, you would still get that sense as long as you built the image with layers in this way. And that carries on across the second tier too. The rendered backgrounds, this is the third panel in this tier but the fourth panel overall of the page, it goes a ways to building that sense of place again. The background elements, the sense that life extends beyond these borders of these panels, it's quite important to the world building and the reality that the fade out strives for. Even the final panel of this page has a fully detailed background, which makes panels like the penultimate one on this page particularly interesting, because it's purposefully devoid of everything else. And to take a kind of a side route around, this speaks to the way that point of view can enter a comic, and a way like prose to show off a kind of authorial voice. Because in moments like this you can almost see the puppet master if you squint a little bit. Someone, in this case Sean Phillips and Brubaker and Breitweiser, are deciding what information to give you and when. The why is informed by the story and a little bit by you as a reader navigating it. But essentially here we get a page of detailed backgrounds that talks to location. Charlie discovering where he is as we do, but a few panels later everything disappears and the focus becomes not on location but on Charlie standing there, isolated from the world around him. Just the fence separating him from the car where his dead friend is. Juxtaposed against everything else in this page gives this moment a ton of power. For a single instance, Charlie is separated from everything. For a moment, we're inside his head, and then we look right, and the world floods back again. I think comics allow you to do something like this in a way that isn't so jarring as it might be in another medium, because the artifice of everything is already so clear. If you look back at that first panel in the background, it's clear we're looking at something someone has drawn. Obviously all of it is that, right? But in the more artificial elements of the world, we're aware we're reading something that has been composed and rendered, and always to various degrees. So when an artist decides not to draw a background, I don't think it's the world-ending, earth-shattering, breaking the suspension of disbelief thing as it may be elsewhere. We could reconcile that with our understanding of how the medium is put together in the first place, and yet when placed amongst the other panels in this page, it still has weight and contrast. And so we can look at the background as a tool or a device, and specifically here in the fade out. A page later, when Charlie gets into a conversation with Maya, backgrounds all but disappear. If we understand removal of backgrounds to be a way for the narrative to narrow in on an individual, this makes a lot of sense here too. Maya is trying to connect with Charlie, and so the art focuses and zeroes in on them. It holds them with arms outstretched, essentially telling us what is important and what isn't. The other thing it asks you to do is similar to how silhouettes work in panels for characters. Their conversation continues on for a bit, and we get a page here where the penultimate panel is Charlie and Maya stood there. Background completely dropped out, just the colour of the world around them. All we get to take in here is relationship to the objects in the frames. In this case, Charlie turned away from Maya, trying to be tough and strong and stoic, and ignoring the woman behind him, retreating more into herself. She's smaller, she's pushed back. In the earlier example, it was Charlie looking inquisitively as the fence separated him from what he was looking at. So what we do there is we get forced to focus on nothing else but these two people, and often in Sean Phillips' work in the fade out, their relationship to something else. And I think that's particularly important, because it's by contrast that things get power or lose power. And Phillips also does this in other scenes too, but with lighting options instead. Here, Charlie is in an office speaking to an agent, an FBI agent, and the background again plays into the focus and importance and point of view of how we see this world and these characters. So in the first panel, you can see how the wall is there with the texture and there's a strong directional light within the scene. Come panel 4, the world is there in the frame, but suddenly it drops out to show Charlie in the darkness on the "how's that sound" line. Here, the agent is inferring he knows Charlie might be involved in something and wants to talk to him about it. Charlie, who knows he has been involved in something, goes small. The world disappears, and all we have to focus on is him, his size and his reaction. But importantly, it's also the distance between his face and the speech balloon, which is butting right against the top edge of the panel, which only serves to make him look even smaller, because it makes the distance part of the point of the panel in the first place. And so location can be used to establish reality, and then it can be dropped out to draw specific attention to character. The ending of the book is particularly telling, I think, because we get 2 pages that are almost pure location. Everything is rendered out, like it's closing in around Charlie. He's stumbling around in the world, a world that looks full and real, with people around him, a world moving. The fade out was just as much about Hollywood as it was about Charlie, and so we almost get 2 individual things isolated here but placed together. Charlie on his own plane in the foreground swinging a bottle, and the background all artifice, now, and buildings. The people have dropped out by this point, and it's just the sense of Hollywood and nothing else. It may not be trying to show you so much a real place as other panels might, but what it is trying to do is give you the representation of place. And Sean Phillips is able to balance those 2 things, the location and the character, in deft and subtle ways. That all comes together to balance the major elements of the story in a way that is frankly brilliant. Thanks for watching. Strip Panel Naked continues to exist regularly because of the amazing support from the patrons, who get access to years worth of exclusive extra writing and content. I'd love your support too. You can find me on Twitter at HassanOE, and the Eisner nominated magazine I edit at panelxpanel.com. As always, hit subscribe and that notification bell to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I'll see you next time.